Hi, my name is Dan B, and we're answering your questions today. This question asks, starting with Raw Mojo, what were the biggest influences around those recordings? Also, Milk Duct Tape. My favorites would have to be Styrofoam Tombstone. What were the influences around the recording? And then the follow-up EP as well. And then he goes on to want to know about the solo recordings like Coffee. I think with Raw Mojo, the best influence I can give you is probably Jack White. Raw Mojo spawned out of a band project I had already in process called Dillweed, and we hired our bass player Nikki, and we started playing some Dillweed songs. But with Nikki, she brought in her influences, and I'd say her biggest one at the time was Jack White. And as we let that influence into the band, it began to take over in a way, and we went a much more raw direction. So we ended up calling the band Raw Mojo, because it had gotten kind of far from what Dillweed was. And it felt like it'd be a cool thing to have like a fresh start with a new band name and mostly new songs too. I think we only kept one song from the Dillweed stuff. So that kind of led to some more simple arrangements. We tried to really simplify what the band was at the time. And instead of trying to dazzle with complicated arrangements or weird, wacky lyrics, instead we decided to opt for pure raw emotion. And it worked for that band. When we went to go record the first album, my friend Terry, who I was in a band called Gino with, and later Sunformer, he had a home studio. So we went to record at his home studio. If I remember correctly, we knocked out 11 songs in one weekend. We brought those songs home. I mixed them on a laptop. And at the time, I was probably listening to Pearl Jam and Ween. I was living with the drummer at the time, Adam. So he was my roommate, and we were basically mixing the songs every day. And both of us were huge Ween fans at the time, and I think we went and saw Pearl Jam around then too. So I would say, as far as influences go for Raw Mojo, definitely anything Jack White, Ween, Pearl Jam. And if you want just like a specific influence for a specific song, there's a song that we did that was kind of popular for that first album called Satan's Floor. And that song started out as a song that I had written and played at open mic. It was called Satan's Floor, but it was a comedy song, like a comedy blues song. And it was just me and a harmonica. You know, it started out like, Satan was sitting at the back of the mill, eating some fries and drinking a beer. And then I'd play the harmonica, like, and then sing the next verse. And that was the only line that made it into the final song, because Nikki came to that and she was like, hey, that's a pretty good song. We should bring that into Raw Mojo, but let me kind of rewrite the lyrics to make them into something more palatable for our band. Having never thought of that song being in the band, I was like, yeah, let's see where this goes, and kind of let her take the reins on that one. So there's a little insight for you on Raw Mojo. So after Raw Mojo disbanded, Milk Duct Tape became a thing. And Milk Duct Tape was interesting because it was essentially two guys who I had never played with before. Matt was the bass player, and we had a drummer named Troy. We would jam in Troy's garage. Well, it wasn't really a garage. It was like a storage shed. And basically that came about because I had just released Coffee, and I wanted to play some of those songs live. And I thought, hey, I'll put together a new band for this. And Troy was interested in that. And then when Matt replied to the ad I had out looking for band members, he came, we started jamming. I think after like 2 practices, we laid 2 songs down. One of them was called Coding Capsule, which was an older song of mine that predates any of the stuff I've talked about so far. And the other was a Matt composition that was called Journey into Parts Unknown. And those recordings were super raw on an 8-track. I think we used 4 tracks for drums, track for guitars, track for bass, and 2 tracks for vocals, something like that. And both those songs got radio airplay right away, so it seemed like a cool thing. And I know Matt was digging it because the reason he replied to the advertisement I put out was, I said, I'm looking to put together a grunge band. And he was like, I like grunge. And when he came in, we found middle ground on grunge with Queens of the Stone Age, because they're kind of post-grunge type music that we both loved. You can hear that Queens of the Stone Age influence in Journey into Parts Unknown. And we kind of leaned in hard into that. Troy had to split the band. So I went back to Adam and asked him if he would like to play in the band for a while, because we had a couple gigs booked when Troy had to quit. He said yes. And we just kept playing and playing. And I would say that first album, not only was it influenced by Queens of the Stone Age, there's another band I would suggest you check out called Gutter Twins. They have a song called Idle Hands. And if you listen to that, you can definitely hear a huge influence on the way Styrofoam Tombstone turned out. And I would call those guys in the same vein as Queens of the Stone Age. It's desert rock. Both those bands have Mark Lanigan in it. And the whole thing was just a lot of fun to record. It was a weird, stressful, and yet joyous and interesting time. I kind of look back at that time in wonderment and be like, wow, that really happened. But it's a fun album. And then you asked about the solo stuff, especially Coffee. Like I mentioned earlier, Coffee was before Milk Duct Tape. And basically what Coffee was songs that I had written during Raw Mojo, but they didn't quite fit the band. So I would just record them myself. You know, some of them I brought in and we try them out and it just didn't fit. Or some of them I knew as soon as I wrote them, hey, this doesn't fit what we do. It's just not our aesthetic. And I compiled a lot of songs, like 20 songs or something like that. And so when Raw Mojo eventually ran its course, I decided to put out those songs that I had written, because why not? I had them all already demoed and stuff, and I just kind of polished up the demos a little bit and threw them out there. I can't say there was any like one huge influence, because Coffee was recorded over a period of like 5 years. So it's hard to say, but if there's any specific influence I had, I think it was probably Ween at the time. Ween kind of gave me the confidence to go ahead and try anything. It's okay to like try any genre and be funny, weird, stupid. You can make people laugh and cry all in the same album. And that's a very freeing thing for an artist or a musician to understand. It really allows your creativity to just flow free and wild, which I think pushes you into new directions and helps you grow. And I like to think that's what led to where I am now, which is working in a band that we call Woos, where we don't really have a genre we're trying to hit. We'll do a writing session and I might come in and say, hey, let's write a pop song today. I feel like a pop song. And then we'll go ahead and write that. The last session we had, we're trying to think of ideas like, what kind of song can we write today? And I said, let's just write something that's all bends. So we would bend every note that we played. That came out really weird and interesting. And I don't know if that one will ever see the light of day, but it's willing to try those things. I think that you're most creative when you're unafraid to just dive in and try something. Thank you so much for your questions. If you have any questions that you'd like for me to answer, or let's just discuss something, feel free to ask. Let's make this a continuing series. I'd love to keep a dialogue going with you. So until next time, be sound.